Hi, it's Umi again. I apologize for the noise around here, but I'm right by the Trio office, so hope you can bear with me. Uh, in this video, I'm really just going to be defining some of the key terms, and that's it. So it'll be pretty short. First of all, balance of power. In the Cold War period, there was, as most people already know, a balance of power between the capitalist world and the communist world. So the capitalist world being Western Europe, United States, Australia, New Zealand, Japan. And then the communist world obviously was the Soviet Union, the USSR, and then what they call the Soviet bloc countries. So most of Eastern Europe, and then China, North Korea, Cuba. So these two tended to balance each other off, and the Cold War was cold because it never turned hot. That is, it never became a nuclear war. It never became a conventional war between the major powers. And there's a third power, a smaller power that might have balanced off, that people tend to forget, which was the third world countries, which had decolonized in that period, mainly in the 50s and 60s, and they formed together in the United Nations called the Group of 77. It was pretty much the majority of all countries are small, what we call third world countries. They changed the term to developing countries. And nowadays what we call the global south, because if you look at the richer countries and poor countries, the poor countries tend to be in the south, the southern part of the world. They used to say east and west, but as Japan started to come in and Korea into the developed world, they started to say it's more north and south. Okay, so that's balance of power. I'm going to skip to another one instead of going down the line. There's another term, hegemon. That's a thing. The United States now is a hegemon. They possess what we call hegemony, that is dominance. So around 1990, the world switched from having a balance of power between communists and capitalists. In 1991, the Berlin Wall fell. China had already become capitalist. Soviet Union broke up, and then Russia became capitalist. So they kind of collapsed, and the US emerged as the dominant power, the hegemon. And both of those systems, a balance of power and a hegemon, both can preserve relative peace. Now that term peace you should take with a grain of salt. You should be skeptical, because often there's peace in the center of power, but there's not necessarily peace around the periphery. So for example, during the Cold War, there was peace in the United States and the Soviet Union, but there was war in Vietnam, there was war in Korea, and those were peripheral wars fought on the margins of the center of power. And likewise with current hegemony with the U.S., there's peace in the U.S., there's peace in major countries, but there's a lot of civil war on the margins. In fact, most wars today are civil wars. Okay, there's a term called bandwagoning, and I may have mentioned the idea of a collective action problem. And collective action is the problem of getting people to act collectively. So unions have this problem. Getting everybody to unify to form a union is a problem when everybody wants to act in their own individual interests. And the managers tend to divide and conquer, give people incentives to not join the union, and so on. The same applies with countries. The example the book uses is the war in Iraq, where the United States bore the brunt of sending troops there, and other countries were sending very minuscule number of troops. The U.S. let them jump on the bandwagon, so to speak, so that they could say that they were sending a coalition into Afghanistan and a coalition into Iraq, and not just going in unilaterally with the U.S. by itself. But in practical reality, that's what was happening. The U.S. was going in alone. I think Germany at one point had 9 soldiers and things like this. It was not really a coalition. There's the term constructivism, and as the book kind of points out, it's supposed to be a new way to look at a new world. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, what some people call a new world order, they started to realize the importance of media, that the media tends to create a reality. And we talked about media in another chapter, but just to give you an example, I started reading The Guardian, which is a newspaper from Manchester, England, and when I read that newspaper, I feel like I'm living in a different world than the one that we commonly think we're living in, because I get news that I don't see anywhere else. I don't see it on CNN or MSNBC or on National Public Radio or really any American media. And so you get the sense that if that's true, if there are things going on that you don't know about, that the media is in a sense constructing the reality that we're living in, hence the term constructivism. But it's a pretty new idea, and it's not fully established as a theory within political philosophy. The next term is democratic peace, and there's some sort of simplistic ideas about war and peace that have to do with trade. Since the Cold War, there have been ideas that have gone around, like some people have noticed that no 2 countries that have a McDonald's ever go to war. And it's probably more or less true. In fact, 2 countries hardly ever go to war nowadays. As I said, most of the wars are inside of countries, they're civil wars. The idea is, if you're democratic enough to be able to have a McDonald's, you don't go to war because you're interested in trade. This theory is obviously very simplistic. The author Thomas Friedman, he wrote several books. The first one was The Lexus and the Olive Tree. Then he wrote The World is Flat, about globalization, that globalization was flattening the playing field for everybody, that everybody had an equal shot, whether they were living in India, China, or the United States. They had an equal shot at participating in the global economy. And he modified the theory of the McDonald's theory to say that any country that is part of a major supply chain will never go to war. So it's the supply chain theory of democratic peace. That if you're part of the supply chain for Dell, so for example, you supply the microchips or the monitors or the silica that makes the chips or these chemicals that go into the electronics, you're not going to be making war because you're more interested in keeping your place in the supply chain and keeping the profits coming in. So there are two isms that come up after that. That's idealism and realism. So idealism is what the American system is supposed to be based on, and in large part has been. It's simply the idea that ideas drive international politics. Ideas like democracy, freedom, liberty, free trade, that those ideas drive international politics. It seems to be related to the liberal approach to international politics, which says that that individuals trade across borders is what runs international politics. And contrast that to realism. Realism says that it's countries, that countries act as one unit, and countries drive politics. Countries and their national interest and their diplomats and leaders. So a good representative of idealism would be Woodrow Wilson, who came up with the idea that led to the League of Nations, which preceded the United Nations. And a good example of a realist is Henry Kissinger, who is quoted as saying things like, military men are to be used as pawns in international affairs. And he said a lot of things way worse than that, but that's a general idea of idealism and realism. Finally, world systems theory. This is a complex theory. There's variations on it. There's basically the idea of the core and the margins, and that the core is where all the power lies, and that it would be large developed countries, and then on the periphery they really don't matter. So say small Pacific Island countries would be periphery, and they don't rise up, they don't have the power, they don't have the numbers or the economic power to really challenge the core. But there are variations on it. If you're interested in world systems theory, look at the writings of Immanuel Wallerstein and his very, very complex theories of world system theory. Okay, so that's it for now. See you next time.